Hi, I'm Jonna Till Johnson, CEO of Nemertes, here with my co-host,
John Burke, CTO of Nemertes.
And you're listening to Heavy Strategy, the show that tries to ask the right questions, not give the right answers. On today's show, we are going to talk about in or out. Specifically, when is it time to bring an IT function in-house or push it out? More broadly, what we see is every time there's a major change, whether it's an economic change or a change within IT due to technology change, organizations should probably be revisiting their sourcing strategy because the decisions you made in the old world may not apply in the new world. And nowhere is that clearer than when we start talking about cloud, because 15 years ago, everybody was moving everything to the cloud. Now, quite a lot of companies are coming to us and saying, what should we bring in-house? Certainly with AI out there, do we want to start building up data centers again and putting AI models in-house? So, John, I know you have lots of thoughts about this. Maybe you want to kick us off.
Sure. I'll just throw in one additional source driving sourcing conversations, and that's demographics. We see cohorts of staff leaving the workforce in areas that have typically been insourced, like running your own network. And so the question is, do I scrabble after replacements, change how I do networking so the staff I can get can do it, or should I outsource the whole thing? So with that in mind, I think the first place that folks need to start is sort of introspective. And why are you talking about insourcing or outsourcing something right now as IT leadership? Is it just because it's a conversation you feel like you got to have, or is there, as there should be, a driver for this conversation to be found in your corporate strategy or your IT strategy? Tactical outsourcing has been a thing, but I've never thought it was a great idea.
Yeah, John, I would say what we're hearing is very practical. Oh my God, we got to cut costs. Why are we spending so much money on cloud? And it's quite simple. We get a lot of people coming to us saying, did you know cloud doesn't save money? And I would like to point out that John and I did a research study years ago determining that for the vast majority of enterprises, moving to cloud is either net neutral or costs more, depending on what you move and how you handle what you're moving. And so, yes, as a matter of fact, we did know that cloud is more expensive than in-house for most organizations. Extremely good organizations, that's a different story, but we can talk about that. But I would say, John, the big driver, whoa, let me finish. The big driver seems to be saving money right now for that.
Which was always chimerical for most folks. I just wanted to point out that held true even as cloud costs continued to drop when they were doing that. And it's only getting more true again as cloud costs ramp up. Also, that even when it's possible to save money in an outsourcing deal, and sometimes it is, some workloads really like the way cloud works, and you can save a ton of money doing them out in the cloud instead of in your data center. But a lot of them don't. And even when you're going to save money in an outsourcing deal, you're only going to save money by giving something up. And that's a consideration a lot of folks don't have front and center in their considerations. What am I giving up? Control is always thing one that you're giving up.
Before you go on down that path, John, I want to highlight something because I think it's an important detail here. It's not even a detail. We, at this point, have used cloud and outsourcing interchangeably, and listeners may be forgiven if they're shrieking like those are two different things. And I just want to highlight that they are not even remotely two different things. Cloud is a flavor of outsourcing. And in fact, one of the things that I've always recommended, well, not always, but for the past 10 years, I've recommended that folks consider is whenever there's a new business process or business function that emerges, you want to start thinking, where on the spectrum of possibilities will you be doing this? And what I mean by that is, let's say, I don't know, you think, oh, gee, I need a new person to handle customer interactions. Well, do you actually need a new person? Or is there some software that can do that job? Can you get that software as SaaS? Would you want that software as in-house? Or these days, do you want an AI to do that? Would that be an AI agent? So one of the things to think about is that it's not like a hard and fast outsourcing has to do with moving people out of the organization, and cloud has to do with moving workloads out of the organization, but that the barrier between people and technology is increasingly malleable. So the idea, or permeable really. And so the idea is that at one end of the spectrum, you might decide that a function requires a human to do it and no technology. Maybe next end of the spectrum is a human assisted by technology, possibly insourced or outsourced AI. The next step over is you don't need the human at all and you can use the technology. And the question of where that technology lives is also a question on that spectrum. So long story short, outsourcing versus insourcing, cloud versus on-prem, it's all the same discussion.
Yep. You can have very specialized discussions about slices of that spectrum, but yep, it's all one big spectrum. And, just it's kind of intuitive if you think it through. You can't outsource an entire application stack without implicitly outsourcing the support of that stack that you're not doing anymore, right down to maintaining the electrical infrastructure. So yeah, there's always staffing outsourcing going on at the same time as application outsourcing. And that is a thing that people need to think about in the inverse as well. If they're bringing something back in-house, if it's an application stack or a service, that's going to have implications for their internal staffing and for their internal infrastructure. And in a lot of companies, shifting money into staff and shifting money into capital budgets is a hard sell if the direction hasn't come from higher up in the organization, from top level leadership. So CIOs need to be ready to make a solid business case that even though you're putting money back in parts of the budget you'd rather not, in the long run, it is better for us strategically, probably better for us economically.
And before we move on to some of the considerations, because I know you have like a meaty discussion ahead of us, John, like what you should think about in making this, I just want to highlight something because we sort of did a slight pivot here and started talking about IT staff as part of the sourcing consideration, which is part of the problem, but not the whole problem. So for example, IT needs to be thinking in the bigger picture. If the CIO is sitting in the boardroom and sales says, oh gosh, I need to hire 5 more people to do sales operations because essentially their function is I need to cut and paste from here to there and I need people to do that. That's when the CIO should raise his or her hand and say, hey, that's one of those things that AI can actually do very, very effectively. Are you sure you need a person? And more broadly, as we go into this discussion of what should go into the decision about how to source, this should apply to everything from the question of, do I need a person to do this function? And then look at all the considerations, control, cost, blah, 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 what we're about to say. So it's all of a sudden the question of where to do the function and how to do the function means that HR and IT become, in some sense, opposite ends of the same spectrum, because HR gets involved when you have to hire a consultant or hire a person to do a thing, and IT is stepping up when it's not a person, it's an application or an AI. And you guys have to be on the same page as to how that decision is made. It can't be a case-by-case decision that, oh, just because of this conversation, we're going to do this thing in AI, but in this other conversation that's identical, we're going to hire a person because the business executive pounded the table and said they needed a person. You should have a framework that helps you decide, when do I want a person? When do I want a person plus technology? When do I just want technology? And then one double click down is, where should that technology live?
Amen to having a framework for having that discussion, because you're going to have it many times. Circling back to why are you considering moving something inside out or moving something outside back in? If it was ever inside in the first place, that's another variation, taking cloud native stuff and becoming your own insourcer for the first time. Why? To save money is a shaky proposition for a lot of folks, or secondary to other considerations like we can't get what we need doing it the way we're doing it now, whichever way that is. So we need to improve our core functions. And we think the way to do that is to shift it in-house or to shift it out. Either way that conversation goes, if that's the focus, be prepared for cost neutral or even increased costs to get those improved core functions. Keep in mind, these are sort of independent considerations from each other. Cost, functionality. Are you trying to leapfrog a technology generation? A lot of folks who moved into cloud were moving into cloud to get access to things that they were going to have trouble spinning up in-house, either for lack of financial resources in their data center space, or for lack of space, or for lack of staff. So keep in mind,
more broadly, there were technologies that they simply weren't prepared to staff up to, lean,
right.
agile, all those things. And so people would just say, forget it. We're going to move to cloud because that way we're getting all that upgrade without having to build it up internally.
Or we're going to outsource to this service provider and pick up the skill set as we go. But we know from experience that lots of times they don't pick up the skill set as they go. So their intention at the beginning to pick it up as an in-house function kind of fades away as they fail to pick up the skill set, and it just remains outsourced. But we're continually spinning up new generations of technology. So the question of how to deal with the next leapfrogging operation is another chance to make the decision in-house or outsource.
Well, and I would also weigh into that, that we do have clients whose strategy is absolutely baked on this, which is that they will always rely on consultants for whatever the new generation of technology is. So basically, that is always going to be outsourced, because building that skill set up internally only to need to turn it over again is not a capability that they want to build. These are typically companies that are very, very lean and are operating with IT being a very low percentage of the overall spend, almost a rounding error. Companies that are more typically likely to have the skills in-house are folks like financial services firms, which tend to be human-heavy, staff-heavy anyway, and certainly in the area of IT. And I'm not saying that derogatorily, by the way. If you're a programmer within a financial services firm, I'm not saying that you are unnecessary. I'm saying that's a strategic decision that financial services firms often make.
And one other reason that we've had our clients talk to us about bringing things back in-house, nobody's talked about sticking things in a horse yet. We'll see. Trojan horses, very
I was going to say AI is kind of a Trojan horse, but we digress.
Is to regain control over systems that are core to their business operations. And sometimes it's because their SaaS platform pushes changes out without sufficient preparation of the way. So things happen with no announcement or minimal announcement that affect their staff's ability to get their job done on a day-by-day, hour-by-hour basis. That's a level of control that sometimes people stop being able to let go of. They need to get back control over release schedules at a tight level, not just a loose and high level control. Sometimes it's the data. They need to hold on to their data, keep it exactly where they want it to be, and not have to trust in somebody else's promises that it's going to be kept where it's supposed to be kept. I'm sorry, Jonna, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think we get the idea. Control data, control processes. You are sort of hammering it home, something I do as well. I would say, though, more broadly, there is a bigger picture, which is a great strategic North Star, so to speak. I hate using North Star, but it's a good basic general principle, which is if the workload function is absolutely business critical and is a differentiator for you. In other words, you are a financial services firm that is better than everybody else at guessing where the stock market's going to go. Honestly, you should not be using any form of off-the-shelf stock market, stock picking software. It's a very simple, silly example. The point is, if it's core to what your business does, that's probably where you want to be throwing your investment. That's where you want to be hiring smart people. That's what you want to be focusing on. And again, that's at a business level. So if IT is looking at this and says, this is the kind of company we are, this is a strategic differentiator for us, that should probably be fully controlled and likely in-house, not necessarily fully in-house. I mean, you can certainly put it in cloud as IaaS or PaaS, but the application component of that function is something you should be owning, and the skill sets is something you should be owning.
Absolutely. And that's one aspect of the risk conversation, as is the control question generally. What risks are you mitigating by putting something out that was previously in? What risks are you trying to mitigate by bringing something back in that has been out? Whatever those risks are, risks of data leaks, risks of loss of function because of a cloud outage because somebody's routers were misprogrammed and nobody in the world gets access to that cloud right now. Whatever those risks are, just keep in mind that by mitigating them, moving in, moving out, you're probably increasing other risks.
So, before we follow on that conversation, I just want to weigh in. I disagree, John, that the strategic alignment is an element of risk. There's risk associated with that. There's risk associated with everything, and we could talk about that till the cows come home. But I think it's a separate thing you have to think about, which is if you're building, and let's be upfront about it. If you're building a workload placement policy, which tells you where you should be putting workloads, you should look at two different things. One is risk and one is strategic alignment. How important is it business-wise to you? Yes, you can decompose that into a risk argument, but I would argue that it's a separate argument from risk because you want to own the crown jewels of your own company. That just makes sense. Otherwise, you wouldn't exist as a company. You aren't differentiated and you will not belong for this world. So I agree with everything you said about risk, but it's not. But burying strategy under risk is a terrible idea. Risk is important. Strategy is important. They're peers.
I can live with it. So looking at the next level down, sort of the practicalities as opposed to the strategic implications or strategic motivations, preferably, you've got a lot of fairly mundane questions that everybody should be asking if they are insourcing, if they are outsourcing, whatever you're doing now. How far out do your current commitments extend? Do they run out at the end of the year, in which case you may not have time to make a migration before you have to re-up on those commitments, and then your vendors have, leverage on you for costs or length of extensions? Are there going to be termination fees? And this is something that mostly applies to outsourced software or managed services contracts.
Or telecommunications is another big one.
But can also apply to colo facilities, can apply to leased data center spaces. Getting out of it early, you pay extra. And then if you're talking insourcing specifically, you've got to run through the whole gamut of, am I ready for this? Do I have the facilities? Do I have the infrastructure within the facilities? Do I have the software licenses I need to run this on premises? Do I have the staff I need? And do the staff I need have the skills I need them to have?
And I would jump in on this because you'd stop to take a breath, John. So that's what I do.
Foolish John.
Right. I would jump in on this though, and say there's also a human component of this, which is many times, particularly when it comes to something like we've outsourced to cloud and now we want to bring back in. There's a sense that, I know the answers to all this because 5 years ago when we made the outsourcing decision, the answer was yes, 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 and yes. And the problem is it's not 2020 anymore. And even though that seems self-evident, I think a lot of us still make assumptions about the capabilities that we had and the skills that we had back in 2020. Those people may have left. Those people may have stopped exercising those skills, so they're now 5 years behind. Or in the case of, say, I think I want to bring my data center back in-house because I need to run all these, expensive energy-consuming LLMs. Guess what? The design that you had for your data center, you can't just port all those workloads into your pre-existing data center and expect it to work. You have entirely different requirements now. So I think the one flag I would say is all of this is true, and particularly beware of the scenario where you feel like you're just reversing a decision that was made in the relatively recent past, and so you don't have to think through everything John was saying. That's not the case.
If you're backing out on something you did a year ago, maybe. Maybe. In your heart and mind the things that have happened to you in the last year. But we all lose sight of how dramatic the changes in our environments and in the larger environment can be over the course of, even 2 years. So no matter how long it's been since the decision you made previously, Yes, as Jana says, start from zero. Don't assume that you understand your current skill set completely in the same way that you did then. Look at it fresh.
Exactly. And that's harder to do than you think because you're walking into it with assumptions. So, yeah.
And one thing I want to keep in people's focus is that this is going to take time. And so, everybody's got to make the decision. Am I doing this as fast as I possibly can, or am I going to, whittle away at this in a very methodical way, application by application in an application suite or department by department across my company? Or am I going to go for some kind of big bang transition where one weekend we're doing it this way and the next weekend we're doing it that way?
Yeah, and
some things can't go that fast.
I'm going to push back on this is going to take time because some things can go that fast.
Sometimes.
And so, yeah, so I think the question of how long do we want to take, how quickly can this get done really matters. And let's not forget that one of the big reasons that people outsourced to cloud was agility. Agility certainly coming from more likely the IaaS or PaaS scenarios, but your ability to spin something up super quickly is a compelling reason to move to cloud. You may be losing that if you come back in-house, or you may not if you do it properly and invest in all the tooling and everything else. I guess the point I'm trying to get at is agility is a consideration always when it comes to making the shift, when it comes to deciding where a workload should live, inside or outside. And I think you're in just as much risk assuming it necessarily has to take forever as you are assuming you can do it overnight. Like, both of those are not necessarily flawed, but they are special cases and outliers. And you should think about, hey, is there a scenario where 18 months is okay for transition? Is there a scenario where I need it to be overnight? And what does it take? What does that imply?
I think one of the things that folks tend to think of later in the process than they should, and it affects the timing, is not the technological aspects of agility. How fast can I spin up that infrastructure in my data center or out in the cloud? How fast can I get the application tuned up and ready to go? But the human latencies in the system, how long before my staff in IT are fully ready to support this in production mode, 24/7, 365. And more importantly, how fast can my organization make a transition? If this is not, I'm taking something I was running in the cloud and running it identically in-house, so it looks exactly the same to my end users. If it's not that scenario, what's the latency of transitioning my user base from old way to new way? Sometimes that is a very simple and ripple-free kind of a transition because what's coming in is simpler, cleaner, intuitive, etc. Minimal retraining, no retraining needed. In other cases, it's we've got to sit people down and train them on how to use this kind of a situation. And then you've got to look at how fast you can do that, how fast they're going to absorb the information, how much remedial support's going to be necessary for the stragglers, what level of staff attrition you can expect because people simply can't or won't adapt to the new way and they'd rather leave and go somewhere else. All these things are considerations you got to have in the back of your head and in the front of your mind at another time as you make your plan for this transition, because however long it takes, however long you're in that transitional mode, you're paying for doing it both ways.
Agreed. However, I would once again split out the issue of, look, if you're doing a brand new application, if you're saying, you know what, we are no longer doing application X, which is outsourced, and we're now doing application Y, which is insourced. Mm-hmm. That's bigger than an outsourced, insourced problem. And yes, everything you said applies, but it's above and beyond outsourcing, insourcing. And I would also say, again, I think there's a tendency for even the way you say these words, John, with this very methodical rhythm, like you can take a methodical approach and it will take a while. You know what? You can also do it overnight, and you can say, I'm hiring a consulting group. They're going to come in. I mean, technical consulting group. They're going to come in. They're going to do all these changes, and we give them 48 hours and we're up and running. And it is possible to do that. It is not necessarily always advisable. And it doesn't always. You're
Uh-huh.
acting like it's crazy, but it's not, John. The thing is,
It's
it is
a
possible.
special case. It is a possibility, and it's one that you got to explore because it may be possible for the thing you want to move in or move out.
Exactly.
But it shouldn't be your expectation as you begin the conversation. It's a question to resolve as you go through your strategizing, planning, and investigation. Don't assume it. It's possible.
But don't assume it's impossible either, is what I want to say.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, as much as I think we all know that I am not the world's biggest fan of Elon Musk, but I do recall at one point he was absolutely frustrated by someone telling him that it would take, 18 months to build a data center. And he basically got in a car, 18 months to get his stuff out of a data center. And he basically rented a truck, went across country and pulled everything out overnight over a weekend. Now, it didn't go very well. There were some bumps. But the point is, if your need for speed is such that you're willing to tolerate a few bumps, it is doable. And it's also possible to do smoothly if you have experience in making these kinds of rapid changes.
Sure. As long as you're walking into it with your eyes open and the expectation of those bumps and the contingency plan for the bumps occurring and maybe even being worse than you're expecting, cool. It's a risk, mitigate it, take the chance. But don't walk into it with that as your expectation and sunnily expecting no problems.
And I don't think anyone would do that, at least not the kinds of people that are smart enough to be listening to our podcast, John.
Exactly.
I would say, though, so if it's kind of to sum up what we're talking about, some of the questions you need to be thinking about: what is driving your decision to either outsource or insource? Is it cost? Is it risk mitigation? Is it strategic alignment? Is it this function has been determined that it is better to be done as a technology than as a human, or vice versa? Is it skill set? These are all things you want to be thinking about as you're making this decision, along with what we just said, time frame. How quickly do you want to do this, and what are you willing to give up to get the time frame that you're looking for?
Understanding those things lets you dot one of the more important I's and cross one of the more important T's, and that is help you define what it means to do this successfully. How will I know that this worked? And then lay out your timeline for evaluating that success. If you're expecting to reduce costs, how far after the transition do you expect an ROI? If you're expecting cost neutrality, but looking for improved services, how are you judging that services improved, and when do you start measuring that? All those criteria you can figure out if you know what you're trying to accomplish by insourcing or outsourcing something. And you got to do that.
Absolutely. So align your business case with your goals. And I will also jump in on the risk. And the reason that I was pushing hard on saying risk and strategic alignment are two different things, because there are risk analyses that you can do. Some interesting statistics I stumbled across not too long ago were that fully 1/3 of large projects fail because of inadequate missing or inadequate risk mitigation and risk analysis components, and that if you have a very solid risk analysis and risk mitigation approach, you can actually reduce that by not 100%, not even 90%, but maybe something on the order of 18 to 20%. So in other words, there's no such thing as having something completely risk-free, but you should have an IT risk framework that aligns with your larger business risk framework that you're applying to this decision like you apply to any other decision. And, it turns out that depending on the value of what it is that you're undertaking, you may have much more leeway than you thought you had to make investments based on risk. Because if one of our clients was talking about the fact that they were doing risk mitigation to avoid failure of a $100 million contract. Well, you know what? A couple percent of $100 million is an awful lot of money you can be throwing at risk mitigation in IT. And that's the kind of thing to be thinking about, that if you say we're doing this in order largely to mitigate risk, looking at what that risk is from a business perspective, not an IT perspective, like what is the risk that, our consultants won't know what they're doing and this project takes twice as long, but a business. This is a critical project. It must succeed. This contract must be signed. The money must go into the bank. At a business level, looking at that risk analysis turns out to be very fruitful in determining how much you can spend to, mitigate that risk. So it's worth noting that obviously in some cases there's going to be a very clear ROI if you're just simply trying to reduce costs. You know what to look at. You look at the cost of management, you look at the cost of transition, you look at the cost of ongoing maintenance, the cost of upskilling or hiring consultants, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I would argue that there's an equally cut and dried risk framework that you should be applying here if your goal is to reduce risk.
Couldn't agree more. We'll just throw in one additional caveat on the risk side. You're looking at the risks of, say, moving things back into your data center, and all of the things that you've figured out are risks of making that move. The transition takes longer than you expected. It's slower moving the data in than your planning said it would be, so it's going to take you extra hours, whatever. All of those things that are specific to the migration process and the instantiation of the new infrastructure are layered on top of your existing risks. So I used to run a data center in a place that was prone to power outages in the summer months because lightning storms, because flash floods, because suicidal squirrels jumping on transformers. Whatever the case.
We've got those suicidal squirrels.
Whatever the case, any planning we did about moving an application in the data center or spinning up new infrastructure, whatever, always had to keep in mind that the power could go out at any time during a summer month. And so we had to have that as a part of the risk calculation alongside all the ones specific to whatever it was we were doing.
But John, I'm gonna push on that. I agree with everything you've said, but you've turned the conversation yet again to IT risks, and I want to make sure that IT thinks also in terms of business risks, because that is an important part of your business case.
Oh, absolutely.
And one of the risks that is difficult to quantify but incredibly important is the risk of not doing something. So if everybody in your industry is using agentic AI to improve their contact centers and you are not, what is the risk of not deploying agentic AI because, your boss says we're only going to do that if we can bring it in-house, and so we'll do it 18 months from now after we've built our AI capable data center? Obviously, there is a cost to that. If you're 18 months behind the market, you should be able to quantify that and say, it doesn't mean that that's the wrong decision. It does mean that you have to be able to look at this and say, okay, we're willing to lose X many $1 million because we're mitigating the risk of our data escaping by building our own data center or whatever.
Or mitigating the risk of pissing off all of our customers by putting a half-baked AI in front of them versus a fully baked one 18 months from now that is that much more mature. That's like three AI generations. No. Yes, but yes. You got to consider functionality risks and customer satisfaction as well as the financial costs of using humans versus AIs.
This is all true, but it is actually antithetical to the point that I'm trying to make, which is there's also a real risk of not doing something fast enough.
If that is a good thing, but if I'm not doing a bad thing fast enough, that's a consideration.
It is, but the problem is your bias is on the side of do things slowly and methodically. And my point is, sometimes
my bias right now is on the side of I don't think AI does good customer service. But yeah, in this exact conversation.
Actually, unfortunately, this is one of the cases where you would be wrong because the studies show that it is better at customer service because essentially AI is really good at doing stupid things over and over again. Like, have you considered rebooting your computer? So just saying, and the data is out that actually in a lot of respects, AI, depending on how you deploy it, does in fact improve customer service and reduces costs in customer service. That's why I picked that example, because there is data backing it up.
I guess I have to defer to data.
But more broadly, it doesn't matter. I could have picked any other business function. The point is there is a real risk to not doing something quickly. Doesn't mean that you have to do something quickly because there's a risk of not doing something quickly, but that you have to factor that into your risk analysis, not just assume that it's always better to be slow and take your time because, look at Intel. They were slow and took their time and they got cut out of the AI chip market. So that's a big risk. How many billions of dollars did they lose by not jumping into the AI market fast enough? And that's the kind of thing to keep in mind when you're doing your risk analysis, that there's a risk of doing something badly. There's a risk of failing. There's also a risk of not moving fast enough.
Indeed. It is one among those risks. Yes. Fully agree.
One among, not the greatest, not the least, just pure risk. And I'm stressing this because I think it's too easy to listen to a discussion like this and come away with analysis paralysis. I shouldn't do anything because the risk of doing it wrong is so great. If I make a change, it could fail. It could be more expensive. No, the point is you have to factor all these things in and then be prepared to move as quickly as makes sense for your case. Obviously, if you're betting the future of the company on AI, you probably want to move fast. If you are adopting AI to keep parity with the rest of the universe, you can be a fast follower or even a more mature follower, and that's probably okay too. And I'm just using that as an example.
Yeah.
That gets back to our whole discussion of the culture of IT and the culture of your industry. But yeah. Okay, John, we've gone fast and furious on some of these things. You wouldn't think that so many of these topics would be so controversial, but hopefully we've uncovered some of the hidden reasons why people stumble on this kind of thinking. Things like forgetting that it's not 2020 anymore or 2019 and that you have different people and different services and different requirements. Things like forgetting about business risk or forgetting about the risk of not doing something along with the risk of doing it.
Or forgetting that you can do things in-house.
Right. Or forgetting that you can do things in-house and it doesn't necessarily mean you have to train up a staff and take 5 years to get conversant in a technology that's going to be obsolete in 3. You can hire the consultants that have done that, have them come in, do it, leave, and bring in the new consultants 4 years from now that are in tune with whatever new technology is then. Because that, as speaking as a consultant, that is actually one of the things that we do. We are risk mitigators for folks. We're the ones that go out there and get smart on things fast because we have to be so that we can advise our clients. Now, we're not the actual hands-on consultants, but that's what we do, and that's part of our value proposition. That's why we exist in business. That's something we've internalized ourselves. The whole point is take advantage of that. You can. People exist that can help you with these things. So, yeah. Okay. Any last thoughts, John?
I think that we've ground the point into the ground that it's a complicated decision to bring things in or to push things out. And it's one that always needs to be undertaken with a certain degree of method and a lot of forethought so that you can execute as fast as you need to and not stumble over things you should have figured out when you were making the decision in the first place.
And the good news is thinking is almost free and can be very, very fast. You can do probably quite a lot of this in a tabletop exercise in the afternoon. We do workshops like that. We help people resolve knotty strategic problems very quickly. I'm saying this only because if you think, oh my God, now you've just convinced me that I have to spend months analyzing. Hours, maybe a day or two, but you just have to devote the time to doing it and focus on it before you take your moves because, it's the old measure 5 times, cut once, You have to think through it.
And it's ironic to me that you're using that example because I've got a carpenter 2 rooms over who, in at least one case, did not measure 3 times before he cut and is
there you go.
Something.
Yeah. Well, I always do it because I'm sufficiently scatterbrained that I'll measure something and say that's 2.5 feet. Wait, was that 2 1/3? So there we go. Anyway, before we sign off, we want to issue a special invitation to Heavy Strategy listeners. John and I will be doing a Heavy Strategy live recording during our Nemertes Next conference, which is the week of October 6th, 2025 in the New York City metro area. We would love to meet you guys in person. So please hit us up. Hit the easiest way to find out more about this conference and more about hearing the recording is just to hit our website. That's nemertes.com, NEMERTES.com. Just fill out the contact form and we'll get back to you and let you know what you need to do. So hopefully you'll be joining us in October to hear the Heavy Strategy live recording.